All right. So, Myra, um, I think I did it again. I didn't say your name right.
That's all right. I answer to any variation.
No, my niece, it's Miriam, right?
Mariah.
Mariah.
Mhm.
My niece, one of my nieces is named Mariah.
Oh,
So
really?
anyway, Mariah, just could you just tell us a little bit about yourself so people know what your background is?
Sure. Yeah. So I am the scholarly communications librarian for University of Iowa Libraries. And what that means is that I work a lot with open access scholarship. So I kind of help people decide where to publish in terms of academic journals. And I sort of help them understand author rights as well. So, if people want to hang on to their copyright for various reasons, I kind of help them with that process, help them understand why they might want to do so. Help kind of with negotiations sometimes too with academic publishers in terms of getting open access publishing paid for, which is a real uphill battle a lot of the time. And then the other part of my job too is that I work with open educational resources, which is kind of the curricular flip side of open access publishing. So that is sort of textbooks and other curricular materials that are published in an open access or other sort of open setting. And so I help faculty who are interested in that process get started and get funding and get support for that. And so those are kind of where I spend a lot of my time. But then I also help answer a lot of copyright questions too. So I get a lot of reference questions from within the university as well as people from outside the university who are interested in, for instance, using copyrighted resources in the course of teaching or, in their scholarship, or maybe they want to use something that the library has, like in our special collections or maybe in a book in our collections. They want to know if they can reproduce that work and maybe something that they're producing themselves. So I'll consult on that sometimes. So yeah, that's kind of what I do at the university. I've been a librarian for about 13 years, I guess. And this whole scholarly communications thing is kind of fairly new to me. I've been in this role for about 5 to 6 years, I guess. And before that, I was a instruction librarian. So I did a lot of teaching about information literacy and collection development, in a lot of different subject areas. So I did philosophy and religion, computer science, English literature, history. So yeah, yeah.
So, I approached you about my project because a couple of things happened in terms of copyright. I had bought a lot of books on Amazon, and they were books on supposedly in the front of the book, the author had written in a foreword by the author had written that use these please, basically. These images are for you, these images are for your use, and you can use them. A complete access to their images. Then, when you flipped over and went to the front of the book, the copyright statement was very um, airtight. Like, this is copyright material. It may not be used without the author's permission, but without the publisher's permission.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, what is it really? And this was all in relation to junk journals, which is the
Mm,
project that I'm working on,
mm-hmm.
where people take images or use these images. And so, first, the question is, can the author say use this and do whatever you want with it, and the copyright say something else?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting case. And I've encountered that too in the wild. It seems like what it is contradictory copyright language. And it's really, I mean, you have sort of no guidance in that situation. From how you're describing it, what it sounds to me is that the author has one intention and the publisher maybe has another. And I would say it probably depends on who holds the copyright in that case. My hunch would be, it would probably be the publisher. And so in that case, regardless of what the author's intentions are, the publisher would ultimately be the entity that would exercise copyright. I mean, that's just my hunch, though. I mean, I don't really know. Do you know if the work was published by a publishing house or whether it was self?
Yes, it was published by a publishing house.
Mhm.
So, but not like Random House or something like that.
Yeah.
There are also cases where I bought books like William Morris wrapping paper, right?
Hmm.
And that stuff is copywritten. And I don't understand. And yet I have a lot of public domain, copyright free William Morris images, you
Hmm.
know, and yet the wallpaper is for wrapping, or not wallpaper, but it's for wrapping. I
Wrapping
mean,
paper. Yeah.
originally, William Morris made it for wallpaper, but it's in these books that is for wrapping paper. The thing is copywritten.
Mm.
So go ahead.
Well, so that's kind of interesting. So it sounds like the underlying image itself is in the public domain, but someone has taken it and sort of put it in wrapping paper format and tried to copyright that instance of it. Is that right?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So people do that. They do that all the time. Yeah. Like every time, somebody will take, for instance, like a classic novel or something that's been in the public domain and put a new book cover on it, or, give it new typography or a new introduction or even new typesetting. They're able to copyright that because anything that exists in a fixed and tangible form and has some element of creativity is considered copyrightable. So, I mean, to my mind, wrapping paper would seem to sort of stretch the limit of that, right? I mean, it's basically reproducing the image on a certain stock of paper. I mean, to me, that's all that really entails. But obviously, the person who made that wrapping paper disagrees. It's interesting. I mean, I don't know that I would agree that that's copyrightable, but clearly they are sort of claiming copyright on that.
Right. So I look at both things, and one of the reasons I'm really interested in this is that the women that create the journals, okay, use everything. You know, um use images, use um a lot of them do it on old books, but a lot of these old books have been reissued. So you don't know. It's like Ernest
Mm-hmm.
Henkel.
Mm-hmm.
I Dover republished his work, and they have a copyright on it in the
Mm-hmm.
70s. Well, I can go to access service special no. I can go to the library annex and get that book, and it's not under copyright.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the images look the same,
Mm-hmm.
and one is copywritten and one is not,
Right.
because one has been reissued and the other one has not.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I would argue, so the reissued version, I would say that the copyright would adhere only to the new elements that were added, right? So any sort of new cover art, any front matter, anything new that was added. The original images, to my mind, would still be in the public domain. And I should have mentioned this at the beginning that I'm not a lawyer, right? So this isn't legal advice in any capacity, but
No. And I understand that.
yeah, but I would say, take the image from the reissue, take the image from Hegel's original. I mean, they're both in the public domain, I would say, because, a reissue, yes, you can apply a copyright to the reissue, but only to the new matter that's added to that reissue. And on top of that, if you're planning on reusing it in an artistic manner, which it sounds like you are, right? Because I mean, that's sort of the purpose, right?
Me, yeah, it's not so much me because I had shown you that one piece where I had used some prayer cards and some holy cards and put them together, and you had sent me something about transformative art. And that was a very clear-cut case in which I took two images, put them together, then put stamps on them,
Yeah.
And in that case, you said that it was transformative, that it was used. So I would love to hear you talk about transformative.
Yeah, so transformative use is sort of part of the fair use doctrine, which is kind of a carve out to copyright that the US Copyright Office has sort of enumerated as part of the US Copyright Code. And it's somewhat amorphous, like the language of fair use, there's sort of these 4 factors that are listed as in fair use, that every time someone wants to sort of make the case for fair use, they have to see whether or not their use meets the threshold for use on all these 4 factors. And transformative use is part of the first factor, which is the nature of the use, right? So the first factor looks at how somebody wants to use a copyrighted work. And if it's educational, if it's journalistic, if it's for scholarship, if it's for access, like for somebody who's disabled, for instance, like, if you're blind and you need access to a book and somebody, makes like a book on tape, that would be covered under that use. Artistic works are not specifically called out in that first factor, except for under transformative use. And transformative use has really come to sort of encompass artistic use over the years. And in fact, in the last 20 or 30 years, courts have really come to rely on transformative use almost to the exclusion of the other factors. There was a case in 1994, I believe it was called Campbell versus Acuff Rose. And in this case, there was a rap crew called Two Live Crew, who did a parody of Roy Orbison's Pretty Woman. And Roy Orbison's record label, Acuff Rose, sued Two Live Crew for copyright infringement. And the courts found that, that Campbell, who was, I guess, the author of the parody, they were victorious at the Supreme Court level because the work was transformative, right? That was the first time really that transformative use was invoked, and it was sort of the hinge point on which that case was decided. And so subsequent to that transformative use case has been brought up more and more, and not even just in conjunction with the first factor of fair use. That idea of transformative use has been brought up in conjunction with other factors of fair use as well. And so, in the past 20 or 30 years, it's become really an important part of copyright litigation, right? So, if it's brought up, it's not necessarily true that the case will prevail, but it is true that if the case is victorious on the issue of transformative use, the case is often victorious, period. So it's a very important sort of keystone in a lot of copyright litigation, especially that of art, right? Art and music.
That I think is really interesting, because to me, and then to me, when I took that, I know it wasn't like Dada ready-made, but to me, they were ready-mades. you
Mhm.
know, that they were ready-made articles that I took and
Mhm.
then I put together in some way, in such a way that to make something new out of it,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
So to me, it was, I know that ready made has a lot to do with data or taking a wheel or taking a bicycle wheel and putting it on top of a stool or something like that, and then
Right.
making something out of it. So, but to me, a ready made is exactly what I did, where I took
Yeah.
literally using ready made as a literal thing. I took two things that
Mhm.
were ready made and
Mhm.
put them together and then stamped them with stamps that I created,
Mhm.
uh, that I made, and then that's how I tied ready made into that
Right.
because to me it was the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the fact that, what you chose to sort of juxtapose, how you chose to arrange those objects sort of constitute a new meaning, you know, and
Exactly.
and that and I think that is where sort of the transformation lies, right? And that's where what you've created is sort of a new work, right? And it is, I would argue, copyrightable. That's a new work. Um, and I don't believe it violates any sort of existing rights that sort of the initial materials would have. Now, I think Tim had mentioned, in our earlier email conversation that I don't remember, was it trademark that he had brought up that might be an issue, or patent?
Right. That's
But
what I
I,
thought.
yeah, but I didn't see anything. I didn't see any trademarks anywhere in the raw materials that you were using. And even if those were present, even if there was sort of a something that could be considered a trademark, I don't think you would be in violation of the trademark because you're not using it as a trademark. You're not trying to say, this artwork is, by Anne, and this is the symbol that's representing the artwork. You're not using it as a trademark, you're using it as art, and so I don't think trademark would really come into play if the prayer cards or the holy cards were patented. You still, I don't think, would be sort of in violation of the patent because you're not using them as prayer cards. And again, I don't think they would be patentable because, they're not the first holy cards. They're not, I don't
No,
think,
they just made remakes of remakes of remakes of remakes of holy
yeah,
cards.
right, right. And so I think maybe those original holy cards could be copyrighted potentially for their artistic arrangement and how they were formed. But again, because of the transformative use, I think your use would be covered under the transformative use aspect of fair use.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we're not actually showing that, but I don't want to show it because pretty touchy material, so
Mhm.
I'll leave it in an obtuse way of talking about it rather than actually showing um the images themselves. Now, um what about the 40% or 80% rule where you take something but you alter it enough to make it into where you alter it enough to be have it become yours?
I don't know. I'm not aware of like a percentage or like a threshold that would, I don't know. I mean, I haven't really run across that in my experience that there's like a threshold that must be reached. I did read something about, are you familiar with the Duchamp piece? I think it's called In Advance of a Broken Arm. It's essentially just a snow shovel that
Right,
hadn't been
right.
altered at all. It was just hung in a gallery as is. Um, and there was no copyright litigation brought, or any sort of litigation from the snow shovel company or anything. But I was reading something from a law review where the authors were arguing that the snow shovel, the work of art, should be copyrightable, even though there wasn't any sort of altering of the snow shovel at all. But the fact that it was displayed in the gallery and the fact that that the audience was being asked to reconsider the snow shovel as, instead of like a functional object, as an artistic one, that act in and of itself would make the work copyrightable, which is an interesting thought. I don't know how I feel about that. I guess I tend to agree, it is sort of an artistic statement, I think. But I don't know if there is, have you come across that anywhere? Like that there is
Well,
sort of
that's what somebody was talking about. One of the people that I interviewed was Lori Marie Jenkins. I don't know if you got a chance to see any of the videos that I have on my YouTube
I saw
channel.
you, but I don't think I saw hers.
Well, she was the one that we talked about copyright.
Oh.
And she is the one that mentioned that if you alter something enough, like 40%, that if you alter that in and make it become something else, that then you've altered it, it becomes yours. And somebody else said that too. One day, another librarian, a retired librarian, I was talking about copyright with her, and she also said something about 40% or 80%. And when Lori Marie gets done with something, she's altered it 80%. And that was something else. Like a lot of these people take magazines, you know, and take images from magazines. And some of them are not from 1920 or 1930. They're pretty new magazines, and then they alter them. Um, they alter the image, like make paper dolls out of them. They take like a picture of a woman and they take legs from somewhere else and the dress from somewhere else and the head is altered. It starts by, or the legs are left and the head is altered. And they're actually paper dolls. They're made differently. But I have something right here that these things are, I'm sorry for that, but I've been collecting these, and these are remakes of Victorian albums.
Oh.
And but I make a family. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
But and I started by putting in cabinet cards that I had collected,
Oh.
and I'm just sort of making, I love this baby. He's sitting there naked on, but anyway,
Cool.
so I'm trying to make a family. It says a family album, and I'm trying to make, a family.
Are those photographs from your own family, or did you?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
These are cabinet cards. They're a certain kind of old photograph that I bought, or I've only gotten this far. But this is the same girl with her dad. And I found these, and so I've got a whole collection of them. As a matter of fact, I went broke buying these albums, but this is a cabinet card. This is loose sort of, but this is
Oh, yeah, yeah.
these are
We have some of
cabinet
those
cards.
in my family, I think.
You what?
We have some of those in my family
Yeah.
tables, I think. Yeah, those are really cool.
And they were like they flipped and closed, but I'm taking them apart because they don't fit in. But this is a cabinet card.
Oh, that's a neat one.
Yeah. So this was a father and daughter, and this is just so I used those. That's one in the family photograph. I used that. But um where the I'm gonna reach again, where the I'm working on this thing right here. I found this album, and
Oh,
basically it's a and there's something I write. It says fairy album, fairy
oh.
photograph album.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's reading backwards in my picture, but so I'm not quite done. Things will fall out. But anyway, um I'm not quite done with this. But you see where I took
Ooh,
the
that's beautiful.
page
I love
and
how three-dimensional it is.
right. I like and I think what people like about them, they call them altered books, but this is what you know, I I made out of that. I tried to make an altered book. This was my idea of an altered book. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not done with it. Things are falling out and um everything, but here's a page that's pretty closely.
Oh, yeah, it's beautiful.
See, and it was beautiful to begin with, but then I didn't keep the image, as is. I'm
Mm-hmm.
still working on it, but then I used it and made and put things on.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm working on this, and my gold flowers fell out,
Mm-hmm.
and my I'm just kidding, but my patches fell out and stuff. So I'm not completely done with it. But anyway, um, that's I think this is how they make altered books. This is not an altered book. I'm using a photo album. The
Mm-hmm.
thing is, they were copywritten in 1996. Shall I read the copyright on it just
Sure.
for the fun of it? Let's see what
Mm-hmm.
it says. It says the Victoria Avenue Paper Company, a division of the 5 Mile Press, um, Ply Limited, 22 Summit Road, Noble Park, Victoria, S174, Australia. Illustration, copywritten by Joy Sugar, 1997. Design, copywritten the 5 Mile Press by Pi Limited. All rights reserved, made in China.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
that's the copyright on it.
Yeah, pretty standard copyright statement. And the fact that it's copyrighted in Australia, doesn't really make much of a difference, I don't think, because Australia is a party to the Berne Convention, as is the United States. And so, that treaty essentially kind of harmonizes copyright throughout the world and basically makes the terms similar, and the signatories agree to sort of enforce each other's copyright laws. And we sort of say whoever has the shortest copyright term will be the one that is sort of applicable. I don't know Australia's copyright term, but I assume it's pretty similar to the United States. But again, I would say, if we use that sort of 80% threshold that, your other guest was talking about, I would say, you probably meet that threshold. And in terms of transformative use, I would say you definitely meet that threshold probably. And another thing to keep in mind is, when we're talking about copyrights and like what they are, copyrights are sort of like this bundle of rights to either reproduce the work, prepare a derivative, distribute it, display it, or sell it, right? And so you wouldn't really run into copyright issues unless you wanted to do one of those things. Display it or sell it probably would be like, where you might come up against one of these things. But, again, I wouldn't really think that would be a problem. Another thing, with copyright is you would have to have the copyright holder bring suit, that's the other thing. And in this case, unless you were mass producing your works and really, had sort of a major market for them, the rights holder probably wouldn't know, and I know that's not really a way that we want to approach the law, right? It's like, oh yeah, nobody's going to know, but it's true. I mean, nobody is probably going to know in this instance, right?
Well, it's going to be so covered up that I'm not actually using the images. I'm just using the album. And
Right.
the album is a reissue. I'm not using the fairies photo album.
Yeah.
I'm using the album for itself. And I'm even the other one, the family photograph album, I'm putting in a made up family, a
Yeah.
photograph album, photographs to make the album. And then I'll probably leave the cover. In this case, a family photograph album, I would probably leave that, but if there were things on the pages, the other pages, then I might cover them but I'm having a lot of fun with this because I read about altered books, and so this is my interpretation of doing them. Like, uh, the people that work in them use them. I mean, they take out pages and they glue pages together and they add flowers and they add things to them. And I just thought I prefer the photo album. For me, the photo album already gave something. And at first I didn't, gave me a venue. And then at first I thought, how do you put photographs in this? And then I watched a lady who had one of these real old, not the 1997 ones, but an old copy of what the Victorian album. These are based on Victorian albums. Okay. So she had a Victorian album, and she slid in something from the top. And I said, oh, so that's how it's done. That you use this and you put things in from the top. I didn't know that. I thought, how would you use these things? Because, you know, you open up the sides and break them or whatever. But no, you put everything up to the top. So I went crazy. I had fabric, so I started pulling, and I worked with fabrics too. So I started pulling fabric through them. And once I got going, I was just like, this piece will do, this piece will do. And I made something completely different out of it. So that was based on the altered rule. That was my experiment with the altered rule.
Interesting.
So I don't know. But anyway, I'm playing around. All these ideas are coming from the thing with the junk journals and watching people work in them and use images. And there's a guy called Tim Holtz, and Tim Holtz has photographs, and you can buy his photographs. and people use them all the time. They also say Tim Holtz about 38 times. So you know that but the thing is, it's not copywritten material. It's
Mm,
just something that he sells.
mm-hmm,
There are images that are meant to be used, I guess.
mm-hmm,
I haven't looked close enough at the package, but I don't think so. I
mm-hmm,
don't think there's any copyright on them.
mm.
So I decided I like my cabinet cards, first of all, but um and they're obviously antiques and they come from, like artifacts or crowded closet or
Mm-hmm.
and like I was amazed that girl I have on that one page, if
Mm-hmm.
when you flipped over, that was the same girl sitting with her dad. And
Oh,
that was how I found, I mean, because I found a group of photographs that were together. That's how I found her and him. Well, my
oh,
family doesn't look anything like this. This is
yeah.
obviously a white family with, you know, in a Victorian or 1950s maybe time.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so that's what I'm sort of working on. And I was really interested in the issue of copyright and how it applies because I think in terms of fair use and transformative use, uh, I think that a lot of that applies to they're, what, do you know anything about fair use or what that is?
Yeah, so fair use is kind of like the overarching doctrine that includes transformative use. And it's used in a lot of different contexts, not just art, but also when people are writing a work or wanting to reuse somebody's work in the process of teaching or scholarship. And that's the thing that I was talking about earlier with kind of the four factors. And it's a doctrine that's included in US copyright law as sort of a carve out. And it's meant to sort of recognize the fact that, there are needs for education, parity, journalism, accessibility, and creativity. And, I think the idea is that we don't want copyright to stifle those activities. Um, and so that's kind of what fair use is. And I can kind of talk about like the four doctrines if you want. I mean, it's kind of wordy, but but I can if you want to.
Sure.
Okay, so yeah, there's these four factors that sort of limit the use of copyright or sort of put the brakes on, the exclusive rights that are granted to a copyright holder. And the first one is factor one, and that's the purpose and character of the use. And we talked about that a little earlier when I was talking about transformative, but this looks at how you plan on using the copyrighted work. So if you're using it for criticism, comment, news reporting, education, teaching, scholarship, or transformative use, that sort of favors fair use. And as with all, this factor as well as all of them, you're sort of looking at each of them on their own merits and trying to kind of weigh on a spectrum whether or not the use is kind of favored or not. And the second factor is the nature of the copyrighted work. So that looks at the work itself and whether or not it's factual in nature or creative in nature. So if you look at something like a Wikipedia article or like a textbook or something that's very factual in nature, if you want to use excerpts of that, like for teaching or scholarship, that's going to favor fair use because it's factual and you can't copyright facts, right? Whereas if you have a novel or, a piece of, music or something like that, which is more creative, fair use is not going to favor that quite as much because you don't want to just blatantly use somebody's creative work, right? The third factor is the amount or substantiality of the copyrighted work that's being used. So, if you're using just kind of a snippet or a short excerpt of a work, that's looked upon more favorably than if you're using the whole thing, if you're reproducing or copying an entire work, that's not going to be looked upon as favorably as, just a short excerpt. And in fact, like in libraries, we used to say, if you use around 10% of a book, if you copy 10% of a book or put 10% in course reserves, then you should be covered under fair use. But actually, that's kind of an older way of looking at things. The courts in recent years have really sort of moved away from that kind of quantitative looking at fair use. But I mean, I think that rule can still be a decent guideline, in terms of the amount of work that you want to use. You always want to use the bare minimum of kind of what will still meet your purpose. And then finally, the fourth one is the effect of the use on the potential market. And so, if you're just taking a book, for instance, and copying it whole cloth and distributing it to your students, say, that would have a potential market effect on the original author, right? Because those students are now not buying that original author's book. On the other hand, let's look at, the art that you were sending us via email. That's not going to have any impact on the Holy Card manufacturer, right? Because nobody's going to buy your art instead of the Holy Cards. They're totally different things. They have a different purpose. They have a different, reason for being. And so, that factor is going to work favorably in your case, where it would work sort of unfavorably in somebody who's copying a textbook, for instance. And so these four factors are sort of what makes up fair use. And a lot of people sort of misunderstand that. A lot of people tend to think, okay, well, if I'm using this item, whatever it is, for an educational purpose, I'm totally covered under fair use. And that's not really the case. Every time you want to use a copyrighted object, you technically have to kind of go through each of those factors and try to document and make a case for whether or not that use is allowed.
I think your kids are leaving the house.
They are.
And they wanted to tell you that they're leaving the house.
Yeah.
And they were pulled away.
Yeah. Yeah, they're doing their very best to be quiet.
They're doing very well.
Yeah.
And I won't keep you very long, but anymore. But I love this talk. But like I said, the altered book market and taking, they take birds from, I don't know where they come from, where some of these images come from, that they're birds all of a sudden in their pictures. I bought some on Etsy, some images on Etsy. I bought some Tim Holtz photographs, and this woman's photographs were horrible. I printed them out, and I printed them out black and white and color. It's not something I would use. I would not use that stuff. But the Tim Holtz stuff I would use, in the little pockets, where I don't have little prints, though I suppose I can get them, little photographs. But anyway, that's the I just find this whole thing interesting. You've been very illuminating.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I think it's one of the most interesting areas of copyright, honestly, like this idea of reuse in the art sphere.
Well, okay, there were some, when I was first watching them and kind of inspired by them, I got some at Crowded Closet, some postcard or some cards, not postcards, cards. And the cards had birds on them, right? And I really liked the birds. And I thought, well, I could use these. And so, but you cut out the birds. I didn't want anything else, but you cut out the birds. Well, I wasn't sure, and then used them, and somehow I misplaced that group. But it was funny because I think it's psychological. I think I hid them from myself. But they use cut out things and cut up things, and these things that belong, when they're in the public domain, that's fine. But public domain stuff has a certain look to it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
it has a certain look of a certain time, a certain era.
yeah.
So I have someone, a Claire from Blue Box or something like that. I never remember these names, but I buy her coffee because she actually makes prints out of, oh, hers are public domain prints.
Oh, yeah.
And so she's someone who took the time to make public domain
Mm,
prints, which meaning she made copies of them.
yeah.
And then there's a whole thing about digital. So basically you buy things on Etsy that are digital, but
Hmm.
you're not supposed to use them digitally. I think
Oh,
they think if you use them, there's no way you can't use a digital image digitally because you have to make a digital copy of the digital image
oh,
in
yeah,
order to use it.
yeah.
So there's I I think in this world that I have entered,
Hmm.
there's a lot of confusion for me. And of course, in terms of transformative use, they all fill the bill, you
Yeah.
know. But I question how much, um, like cutting those birds out. They're
Hmm.
still the birds. The birds, I haven't altered the birds. I'm
Yeah.
gluing the bird onto something,
Hmm.
but I don't know.
But you're
But there
taking
are
the words out of
birds,
their original context and making an
right?
artistic choice to kind of situate them in another setting, right? And that's sort of a different artistic choice than what the original artist had made, I would argue. But, I mean, a plaintiff might disagree.
Well, the thing is that there are enough in the public domain. The Biological Heritage Library has tons of them. If I
Yeah.
want a bird, I can go get a bird
Yeah.
and cut it
And
up and
biological illustrations from that era are just so beautiful too.
exactly, exactly.
Have you ever read the
Anyway,
public domain review?
yeah, I have it. The
Mm.
PDR just came to me last week.
Oh.
They send me a newsletter,
Mm, hmm.
and there were some images, uh maps and things of the universe that I really like.
Yeah.
And I had bought a used 4x5 printer, and I thought, you know what? I think I'll try printing these. And but with them, I know that something is uh, in the public domain.
Right.
The public domain review does that, and
Hmm.
it's and they have books too. Like
Yeah.
you can order books from them, and the map images that I was looking at, they actually can go. They can be. They're in a book and with other 500 images. So that's done by the public domain review,
Hmm.
and it's out of stock or
Oh.
back ordered and stuff like that.
Mhm. I almost ordered some mounted prints from them once, but I guess they were prohibitively expensive or something.
Right, that's the trouble.
Yeah. I thought I wanted one, and then I'm like, oh, this one that's affordable is like a 3x5.
Right, right.
So I ended up not getting it, but a printer I think is the way to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, you had
Anyway,
mentioned finding some, cards and things at the local thrift stores and things. It's so much fun. I like to go to Artifacts sometimes and just go through the old postcards and read people's messages from, like the 20s and the 30s. It's funny what people used to write. It just seems like so mundane to the modern. ear, like just a little missive about the weather or about the travel conditions, and that was pretty much it.
Well, there's just so much room. I joined something called Post Crossing,
Mm.
and that's where you send postcards to people
Oh,
somewhere in the world.
oh,
So
that's neat.
I know. I thought, okay, well, I'm very interested in mail art also.
Mm.
So they there's some people who will do an actual swap, like
Mhm.
there are lots. Anyway, look at Post Crossing and just have a look at their homepage,
Oh,
and
yeah, I will.
you put a profile. It's one word, Post Crossing.
Hmm.
So far, I've sent three postcards. I just joined. You're
Oh, that's
looking it
cool.
up. You're perfectly a librarian. You have
I
your
know.
computer right next to you. No, look it up.
I
You,
am. I'm looking it up right now.
okay,
Oh, that's neat. I'm gonna have to
right.
sign myself up for that. I used to send postcards a lot, like when I was younger in my 20s. I have a whole collection from, yeah, just various correspondences I had when I was younger.
Well, I used to have books of pen pals.
Oh,
You picked a pen pal and you
mhm.
wrote to the pen pal, and then the pen pal wrote back to you if they
Yep.
wanted to. And part of it, there was movie gossip in these books, and it was just something that I liked a lot. So when I came across Post Crossing, I thought, it's just up my alley.
Yeah.
It's like it's the kind of fun thing I like to do.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I'll have to take a look at that.
yeah, you just send, but you know what it is to send that postcard? It's $1.80.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
because it's international.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And the first one took 16 days to get there.
Wow.
It was by the Baltic Sea in Germany.
Wow. That's cool. So then do you get like, is it like a pen pal situation where you get
It can be, but mostly it's just people sending postcards,
mhm.
and then you get postcards, and they say on them, you look at their profile, it says they want direct swaps. So if
Mm.
they want direct swaps, you can write to them. And also uh the site has, if you find a profile, I wrote to this woman called Sissy. Sissy has godchildren in Africa,
Mm.
and I just find that she likes cabaret, she likes musicals, and
Mm.
uh, she's interested in direct swaps. So I would then Hedda or Hentrud, this
Mm.
guy that used to have two newspapers and book edited.
Mm.
So he wants no direct swaps. So that one time I send him a postcard, I guess that's it, you know,
Oh.
because they give you a postcode. So
Mm-hmm.
the postcode, then when they get that thing, they put the postcode on so that they know that y- you know, and the site knows that they've received your postcard. It's pretty complex. Some
Yeah,
guy
it sounds
named
like it.
Paolo uh did this because when he was young he liked getting postcards. So
Yeah. It is a real treat getting postcards. I should sign my kids up for that.
and they have kids, so they have
Hmm.
to be careful. You have to be careful. You have to be polite and
Yeah.
all the time. Well, my dogs are starting to go crazy. So I think my roommate just came home and
Mm.
they're all going to greet her. I saw your dog too behind you.
Yes.
So
Yeah, I think my family took her out, but we've only had her for like a month. I guess
Oh,
maybe
wow.
like 6 weeks now, but yeah, she's great.
So are you working from home now, or are you working?
Mostly from home. I have a hybrid schedule, so I work from home mostly, but then if I have a meeting or if I have some need for better bandwidth, I have an office at the university too.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah,
And it was wonderful talking copyright with you. I
yeah.
hope we'll talk again soon, and I hope your family will forgive me from taking you away from whatever they were up to.
Sure thing. All right. Well, I'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.